A single dad inherited a Cliffside home. Who he saw inside changed his entire life. At 38, he had settled into a simple, predictable routine. Wake up early, get Emma ready for school, commute to work, come back home exhausted, cook dinner, and finally collapse onto the sofa with a sigh. Life as a single father was exhausting, but he had learned to manage it. Still, a small part of him always longed for something different, something that could make life feel a little brighter. He never imagined that the something different would arrive in the form of a letter from a lawyer, announcing an inheritance from a relative he barely remembered. The envelope had arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Mark had been juggling a pile of laundry while Emma chased the cat around their modest apartment. The handwriting on the envelope seemed old-fashioned, almost elegant, and the wax seal gave it an air of importance. He had paused, curious, and carefully opened it, revealing a letter that changed everything. It was official and brief. A distant uncle whom Mark had met only once during childhood had left him a property, a cliffside home overlooking the ocean. Mark read the letter twice, unable to fully absorb its meaning. A house on a cliff, inheriting it out of the blue, it seemed almost like a dream or maybe a trick. He looked at Emma, who was humming a tune while building a tower of blocks, and wondered how he would even explain this to her. She was too young to understand the idea of inheritance, of old relatives, or the significance of a house she had never seen. Yet deep down, he felt a spark of excitement he hadn't felt in years. For the rest of the day, Mark couldn't focus on work. Every thought kept returning to the image of the cliffside home. He pictured the waves crashing against the rocks below, the wind brushing through the open windows, and the feeling of standing somewhere high and free. It was strange how a single property could ignite so many emotions: hope, curiosity, and even a sense of fear. Could this home be a fresh start? Could it offer something he hadn't had for years: peace, beauty, and perhaps a chance to heal? Mark decided he needed to see the house for himself. That weekend, he packed a small bag for him and Emma, along with a few essentials, and rented a car. The drive was long, winding along roads that climbed hills and twisted around valleys, revealing glimpses of the vast ocean. Emma pressed her nose against the window, her eyes wide with wonder as she watched birds soar above the cliffs. Mark smiled at her excitement. She had a way of finding joy in the simplest things, and he knew she deserved more than the cramped apartment and the endless routine they had settled into. As they approached the property, the house came into view. Perched dramatically on the edge of a cliff, it was older than Mark expected, with weathered stone walls and large windows that reflected the sun in dazzling patterns. The garden had clearly been neglected for years. Weeds grew tall and wildflowers fought for space among the rocks. Yet, despite its wear and age, there was something undeniably majestic about the house. It seemed to command attention, like it had a story to tell. Mark parked the car and stepped out, letting the salty breeze hit his face. He could hear the faint roar of the ocean below, mingled with the distant cries of gulls. Emma skipped ahead, her small boots clattering against the uneven stones of the pathway. "Daddy, it's huge." "Look at that," she exclaimed, pointing at the house. Mark nodded, feeling a mixture of awe and anxiety. The house was beautiful, yes, but it was also unfamiliar and lonely, a stark contrast to the life he had always known. The front door was heavy, and the old brass handle felt cold in his hand. With a deep breath, he turned it, and the door creaked open, revealing the interior. Dust floated in the sunbeams that streamed through the tall windows. The air smelled faintly of salt, wood, and something he couldn't identify, a mix of age and stories left behind. Mark stepped inside, Emma following closely, and looked around. The house was larger than he had imagined, with high ceilings, wooden beams, and rooms that seemed to stretch endlessly. Each room held traces of the past: faded furniture, books left open, and portraits on the walls staring silently. As he explored, Mark felt a strange mixture of excitement and unease. This house, empty for so long, seemed to hold memories he didn't know yet. In the living room, a grand fireplace dominated one wall, and above it hung a painting of a young woman, smiling softly. Mark wondered who she was, perhaps an ancestor, a relative he had never met. The house had a sense of waiting, as if it had been patiently anticipating someone to come and bring it back to life. Emma wandered through the rooms, touching the walls, opening drawers, and marveling at the sheer size of the place. "Daddy, can we live here forever?" she asked, her eyes shining with excitement. Mark smiled, but his heart tightened. Could they really start over in this massive, mysterious home? Could he manage a new life here, away from everything familiar? And yet, seeing Emma's joy made him want to believe that anything was possible. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting golden light across the ocean, Mark climbed to the edge of the cliff behind the house. The view was breathtaking. Waves crashed against the rocks far below, sending white sprays into the air. The wind was strong, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt a sense of possibility. Perhaps this house could be more than a shelter. It could be a home where he and Emma could heal, laugh, and grow together. But even as he felt hope, a small sense of unease lingered. The house was empty, yet it did not feel entirely uninhabited. There was a faint creak in the floorboards, a shadow that seemed to move just out of sight, and the feeling that they were being watched by someone or something unseen. Mark shook off the feeling, attributing it to the eeriness of an empty, old house. Yet deep down, he couldn't ignore the sense that this place held more secrets than he could imagine. That night, after exploring and letting Emma settle into one of the spacious bedrooms, Mark sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea, listening to the wind howl outside. He thought about his life, his struggles, and the new possibilities the house represented. He realized that inheriting the house was not just about owning property. It was about being given a chance, a rare opportunity to rebuild life for himself and Emma. He wondered if his late wife would have approved, and a bittersweet smile crossed his face. He missed her more than ever, yet he felt her presence in the house, as if she had left a part of herself here, waiting for him to find it. As Mark drifted to sleep that night, the sound of the ocean waves below and the rustling of the trees outside created a rhythm that was strangely comforting. He didn't know what awaited him in the days to come, but for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. The Cliffside home was more than a house. It was a chance to begin again, to discover what life could be beyond routine, fear, and loss. And somewhere deep inside, he sensed that this place, and the people he had yet to meet within it, would change his life forever. Mark woke up the next morning to the soft light of the sun spilling across the large bedroom windows. Emma was already awake, sitting by the window and staring at the ocean waves that seemed endless in their rhythm. "Daddy, look at the water," she exclaimed, her small hands pressed against the glass. Mark smiled, feeling the warmth of the morning sunlight and a rare sense of peace. For a moment, the house felt like it could be theirs, a new beginning free from the challenges of their old apartment. After breakfast, Mark decided to explore the rest of the house, wanting to understand the full extent of what he had inherited. Emma tagged along, her curiosity infectious. They wandered through long hallways, climbed a narrow staircase that creaked with every step, and peeked into rooms filled with furniture covered in white sheets. Most rooms were empty, save for a few old books, picture frames, and worn rugs. Everything seemed frozen in time, as though the house had been waiting patiently for someone to awaken it. As Mark reached the guest wing of the house, he noticed something unusual. One of the doors at the end of the hallway was slightly ajar, and a faint noise drifted through it, a soft rustling, almost like someone moving furniture. At first, he thought it was the wind, or perhaps a stray animal that had made its way inside. But as he drew closer, the sound grew clearer and it no longer seemed accidental. It was deliberate, like someone was there, alive and awake. "Hello," Mark called, his voice steady but cautious. Emma stayed close behind him, her small hand gripping his tightly. There was a pause and then a voice answered, soft but firm. "I'm here, please don't be angry." Mark froze. He hadn't expected anyone else to be inside the house. "Who are you?" he asked, his mind racing. The voice replied, "My name is Leela. I live here." "Please don't make me leave." Mark blinked, trying to process what he had just heard. "Live here, but this is my family's house. You can't just stay here." His tone was a mix of confusion and caution. Emma, sensing the tension, tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, is she going to be okay?" Mark took a deep breath and pushed the door open slowly. There, in the middle of the room, was a young woman, not much older than he was. She looked fragile yet determined, with dark hair falling loosely around her face and eyes that held a story of their own. She stood with her arms crossed, as if trying to protect herself, and when she spoke, her voice trembled slightly. "I had nowhere else to go. I didn't mean to intrude, I needed a place to be safe for a while." Mark studied her carefully. There was something about Leela that made him pause, something that went beyond appearances. He could see fear, yes, but also resilience. She seemed like someone who had endured more than most people could imagine, and yet she hadn't lost her strength. The house suddenly felt even more alive, not just with its walls and history, but with the presence of this stranger who had found her way into it. Emma, always empathetic, stepped forward. "Hi, I'm Emma. You can stay if you want. Daddy won't be mad, right?" she said, looking up at Mark with hopeful eyes. Mark couldn't help but smile at his daughter's innocence and kindness. He glanced back at Leela, who looked unsure but relieved. "Maybe, just for now," Mark said finally, deciding to let reason guide him. He couldn't ignore the fear and vulnerability in her eyes. "We'll figure things out, but you can't just stay forever without a plan." Leela nodded quickly, a mixture of relief and gratitude washing over her face. "Thank you. I promise I'll be careful and I won't disturb you." Over the next few days, Mark tried to adjust to the unusual situation. Leela kept mostly to herself, exploring the parts of the house that were less lived in, cleaning where she could, and occasionally helping Emma with small tasks. Emma grew attached to her quickly, drawn to the kindness and warmth she sensed in Leela. She would sit with her in the garden, listening to her stories about places she had been, and laughing at small jokes that seemed to lighten the air of the old, quiet house. Mark, meanwhile, was conflicted. On one hand, he knew the house was legally his, and he could insist that Leela leave. But on the other hand, he felt an unexpected sense of responsibility. Leela wasn't just a stranger. She was someone who needed help, someone who had found herself at the edge of the world and somehow ended up here. Mark realized that the house had brought them together, not by accident, but in a way that felt almost fated. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Mark and Leela found themselves in the living room, talking quietly. "Why here?" Mark asked, curious. "Why this house?" Leela looked down at her hands. "I don't know. I was running from a life I couldn't bear anymore, and I needed somewhere quiet. When I saw the house from the Cliffside road, I felt safe, like it was calling me. I know it sounds strange, but I had to come." Mark nodded, understanding more than he could put into words. Everyone has a moment in life when they're desperate for safety, for a place where they can breathe and simply exist. Leela had found that place, and somehow he felt that he was meant to help her, even if it complicated his life. Days turned into weeks, and the three of them began to settle into an unusual routine. Leela helped with chores around the house, repaired broken fixtures, and even started planting a small garden in the neglected yard. Emma adored her, and Mark began to see a side of life he hadn't experienced in years: hope, companionship, and the quiet joy of helping someone rebuild their life. Yet, despite the growing bond, there were moments of tension. Mark worried about the legality of the situation, about neighbors or authorities discovering Leela's presence. He also worried about Emma's safety, wanting to ensure that nothing from Leela's past would follow her into their lives. And deep down, he felt an unfamiliar emotion stirring, something like fear mixed with hope, because he knew that opening his heart and his home to Leela might change everything he had known about life and love. One afternoon, Mark decided to ask Leela more about her past, hoping to understand her better. They sat in the sunlit kitchen, the smell of fresh bread in the air, and he gently asked, "Why did you have to leave? What were you running from?" Leela's eyes filled with tears, but she spoke steadily. "I had to leave a dangerous situation. Someone I trusted betrayed me. I couldn't stay where I was anymore. I didn't know where to go, and then I found this house. I know it's not mine, and I don't want to cause trouble, but it's the only place I felt I could be safe." Mark felt a deep ache in his chest. He knew what it was like to lose someone, to feel exposed and vulnerable in a world that seemed unforgiving. He also realized that Leela's presence, though complicated, had brought life and warmth to the empty house. It was no longer just a property. It was becoming a home. That night, as the three of them sat together in the living room by the fire, Mark reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. The house that had seemed empty and lifeless now hummed with quiet energy. Emma's laughter echoed through the hallways. Leela's presence brought a new sense of purpose, and even Mark felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope that life could be better, brighter, and full of connection once again. Despite the uncertainty, Mark knew one thing for sure: meeting Leela had altered the course of their lives. The Cliffside home was no longer just a house inherited from a distant relative. It was a place of beginnings, of second chances, and of unexpected bonds. And as he looked out at the ocean that night, the waves crashing against the rocks, he realized that life had a way of bringing the right people to the right place at the right time, even if it came in the most surprising and unplanned ways. Mark didn't know what the future held, but he felt ready to face it. With Emma's hand in his and Leela's quiet presence nearby, he understood that the house was more than just walls and furniture. It was a chance for healing, for growth, and for discovering that sometimes the people we least expect can change our lives in ways we never imagined. And so, life in the Cliffside home continued, each day bringing new challenges and small joys. The mysterious resident, the once empty house, and the single father with his young daughter began weaving together a story that was just starting to unfold. A story of resilience, trust, and the surprising ways life can bring hope where it seems impossible. Weeks passed in the Cliffside home, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. The house, once quiet and empty, now felt alive with energy. Emma laughed more than she had in years, running from room to room, discovering corners of the house she hadn't explored before. Leela moved through the spaces with a quiet confidence, taking care of things that Mark hadn't noticed needed fixing, and arranging the rooms so they felt more like a home. Mark watched this change with a mixture of pride and curiosity. He had never imagined that a stranger could so quickly become part of their daily life. At first, he had been cautious, careful not to let his guard down, but as the days went on, he realized that Leela's presence brought more than companionship. It brought hope. She was like a gentle force that encouraged life to flow naturally through the old home, dusting away the loneliness and filling the rooms with laughter and warmth. Emma adored Leela. She followed her around, asking questions about her past and listening intently to her stories. Leela shared small bits, enough to keep Emma engaged but careful to protect herself. Emma, in her innocent way, never questioned why Leela was there. She only saw kindness, someone who cared about her and played games, read stories, and laughed alongside her. Every night, Emma would insist on Leela reading a bedtime story before she went to sleep, and Leela would smile, the lines of stress and worry on her face softening for a moment. One afternoon, Mark found himself sitting on the porch, watching Leela and Emma tend to the garden. The once overgrown yard was slowly being transformed. Leela had planted flowers and vegetables, showing Emma how to care for them, how to water them gently, and how to observe the tiny changes in plants over time. Emma was fascinated, and Mark couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace. This house, once intimidating and cold, was becoming a place of learning, growth, and life. Mark and Leela began to spend more time together in quiet moments. At first it was practical, discussing chores, repairs, and the best way to make the house safe and comfortable. But gradually, their conversations deepened. They talked about their fears, their dreams, and the things they had lost. Mark shared memories of his late wife, speaking of her with tenderness and sorrow. Leela listened quietly, her hand occasionally brushing his, offering comfort without words. He realized that sharing these memories, these vulnerabilities, created a bridge between them, a bridge of understanding and empathy. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with shades of orange and purple, Mark and Leela found themselves on the porch swing, sitting in silence for a while. The ocean waves crashed against the cliffs below, their rhythm soothing and constant. Mark finally spoke. "I never expected to meet someone like you here," he said softly. Leela looked at him, her eyes reflecting both sadness and gratitude. "And I never expected to find a place like this, or people like you and Emma," she replied. They laughed quietly, a gentle sound that seemed to belong to the house now. It was a sound of relief, of connection, and of beginnings. Mark realized that his life, once so rigid and controlled, was now opening up to something new, something unpredictable yet full of promise. He had learned that allowing someone into his life did not mean losing control. Sometimes, it meant finding balance and discovering new ways to love and trust. However, not every day was easy. There were moments of tension, small disagreements, and reminders of the challenges they all faced. Mark worried constantly about Leela's past, wondering if the danger she had fled might follow her to the house. He also struggled with his own feelings, realizing that he was starting to care for Leela in ways that went beyond friendship. It was confusing and frightening, but he could not deny the sense of connection that had grown between them. One rainy afternoon, a storm rolled in from the ocean, and the house creaked and groaned under the force of the wind. Mark and Leela sat together in the living room, Emma tucked safely under a blanket on the sofa. The storm outside mirrored the storm of emotions inside Mark. He realized how much he relied on Leela, how much her presence had become a part of their daily life. "I don't know what I would do without you here," he admitted quietly. Leela reached out, placing her hand over his. "And I wouldn't have survived without you either," she said. Through these moments, the bond between Mark, Leela, and Emma grew stronger. They began to feel like a family, not bound by blood but by shared experiences, trust, and care. Leela's laughter became a constant presence, Emma's joy infectious, and Mark's protective instincts softened into a sense of responsibility and love for both of them. They learned to communicate without fear, to support each other in small ways, and to celebrate the little victories that came with living in the Cliffside home. One morning, Mark found a letter tucked into the pages of an old book in the study. It was from his late wife, addressed to him in handwriting he had almost forgotten. The letter spoke of hope, resilience, and the importance of finding joy even in the smallest moments. Reading it, Mark felt a wave of emotion, realizing that life had given him a second chance, a way to honor the past while embracing the present. He shared the letter with Leela, and together they felt a sense of connection that was both comforting and profound. As the days turned into weeks, the house became more than just a shelter. It became a place of learning, growth, and healing. Leela taught Emma how to care for the garden, cook simple meals, and understand the value of patience and perseverance. Mark learned to open his heart, to trust, and to embrace uncertainty. Together, they created routines, traditions, and memories that would shape their lives forever. Despite the harmony, Mark never let his guard down completely. He knew that life had a way of testing even the strongest bonds. Yet he also knew that the bond they shared, built on trust, care, and shared experiences, was resilient. The house, once empty and silent, had become a sanctuary. And in that sanctuary, Mark, Leela, and Emma discovered a simple truth. That family is not only about blood, but about love, support, and the willingness to be there for each other in times of need. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in soft shades of gold, Mark stood at the edge of the cliff, looking out at the endless ocean. Leela joined him silently, and together they watched the waves crash against the rocks. Emma ran ahead, her laughter carried by the wind, filling the space with light and joy. Mark felt a deep sense of gratitude and wonder. The house had brought them together in ways he could never have imagined. He realized that life was not about avoiding challenges or fear, but about embracing opportunities and connections. Leela had come into their lives when they needed her most, and in doing so, she had changed everything. Emma had gained a friend, a mentor, and a source of love beyond her father. And Mark had found someone who reminded him that it was possible to heal, to trust, and to hope again. As night fell, the three of them gathered by the fireplace, sharing stories, laughter, and the comfort of each other's presence. The storm outside had passed, leaving the house bathed in the gentle light of the moon. Mark looked at Leela and Emma and understood that this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge them, teach them, and ultimately transform them. In the quiet of the Cliffside home, life continued to unfold, each day bringing new lessons, joys, and challenges. The bond between Mark, Leela, and Emma grew stronger, rooted in trust, understanding, and the shared experience of creating a home from the unexpected. They were no longer just a single father, a young woman, and a little girl. They were a family, united not by circumstance alone, but by the choice to care for and protect one another. And in that choice, Mark discovered something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope that life could be beautiful, that love could be found in unexpected places, and that even in the face of uncertainty, the heart could heal and grow. The Cliffside home, once a symbol of inheritance and mystery, had become a place of belonging, of connection, and of beginnings that would shape the rest of their lives. Life in the Cliffside home had grown comfortable, almost routine. Mark, Leela, and Emma had found a rhythm together. Leela helped with the garden, cooked meals with Emma's enthusiastic assistance, and spent quiet evenings with Mark, talking about hopes, memories, and dreams for the future. The house, once silent and empty, had transformed into a lively, warm home filled with laughter, conversation, and life. Yet beneath the calm, Mark couldn't shake a sense of unease. He noticed it first on a windy afternoon when the doors and windows rattled, and the house seemed to creak more than usual. Leela had been tending to the garden, and Emma was chasing a stray butterfly across the yard. Mark was inside, repairing a loose floorboard in the living room when he heard a distant knock, faint but deliberate. At first he dismissed it, thinking it was the wind or a bird hitting the window. But then he heard it again, this time louder, more insistent. Mark's heart raced. He approached the door cautiously and peeked outside. There was no one in sight. The garden gate swayed slightly, as if someone had passed through it, but the yard was empty. A chill ran down his spine. He closed the door and locked it, feeling a sudden sharp awareness that the past, Leela's past, might be closer than he realized. That evening, he sat with Leela and Emma by the fireplace, trying to enjoy the warmth and comfort of their home. Yet he couldn't keep the worry inside. "Leela," he asked gently, "is there someone from your past we should be concerned about?" Leela froze for a moment, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and sadness. She took a deep breath and spoke quietly. "Yes, Mark, there is someone dangerous." I didn't tell you before because I thought it was over. I thought I was safe. But maybe they've been following me. I've tried to forget, but it seems like the past doesn't let go so easily." Mark felt a surge of protectiveness. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll face this together. No one is going to hurt you or Emma while I'm here." Leela nodded, her hands trembling slightly. She trusted him and he would not let her down. The next few days were tense. Mark took extra precautions, checking the doors and windows, ensuring the house was secure, and keeping a careful watch on the property. Leela, meanwhile, began to open up more about her past. She shared stories of betrayal, of people she had trusted who had caused her harm, and the difficult journey that had brought her to this cliffside home. Her voice was steady, but her eyes held the weight of the memories she carried. Mark listened silently, understanding the courage it took to speak about pain so openly. Emma, though young, sensed the tension in the air. She asked questions gently about why Leela seemed worried, and Leela explained in simple terms that sometimes people make mistakes or act unfairly, but they had to stay strong together. Emma hugged her, offering the comfort only a child could provide, and Leela's face softened with a small, grateful smile. One afternoon, Mark found a small, hidden compartment in the study. Inside, there was a journal belonging to Leela. At first, he hesitated to read it, unsure if he should invade her privacy. But his curiosity and concern for her safety got the better of him. As he turned the pages, he discovered details about Leela's struggles, her fears, the people who had hurt her, and the ways she had learned to survive. Each entry revealed her resilience, but also the lingering threats she had faced. Mark realized that protecting her would require more than just a safe home. It would require vigilance, courage, and trust. That night, as the wind howled outside and the waves crashed against the cliffs below, Mark and Leela sat together in the living room. They spoke quietly, planning for possible challenges. Mark promised to stand by her no matter what, and Leela, in turn, promised to trust him completely. There was a solemn understanding between them, a recognition that life could be unpredictable and sometimes dangerous, but that together they could face anything. Days later, the tension reached a peak. Mark noticed strange footprints in the garden, footprints that didn't belong to him, Leela, or Emma. The gate had been slightly ajar again. Panic rose in him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew fear would not solve anything. He immediately told Leela, and they devised a plan to protect themselves. Mark secured all entrances, placed lights around the property, and even spoke with a local neighbor he trusted, discreetly asking if anyone unusual had been seen in the area. Leela's past was catching up with her, and Mark realized that the idyllic life they had begun to build could be threatened at any moment. Yet, in the face of danger, their bond grew stronger. Emma, sensing their concern, remained brave and curious, unaware of the potential risks but trusting the adults around her completely. Her innocence reminded Mark of what they were fighting for, their safety, their family, and the chance to live without fear. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples, Mark noticed a shadow moving near the cliffs. He called out, but no one answered. The sense of unease was overwhelming. Leela, seeing his concern, took his hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "We've faced hard times before. We can handle this too." Mark nodded, drawing strength from her words. Together, they realized that facing the past was not just about confronting danger. It was about supporting each other, relying on trust, and remaining strong for Emma. The following morning, Mark decided to take proactive steps. He contacted a local attorney to understand their legal options regarding the house, ensuring that Leela's presence could be protected if needed. He also started documenting everything unusual happening around the property. Leela, meanwhile, helped organize the house, making sure they had emergency plans in place, and that Emma understood simple safety rules without frightening her. Despite the tension, moments of tenderness and connection continued. Mark and Leela would sit together in the evenings, talking about lighter things, books, memories, dreams. Emma would snuggle between them, sharing small jokes or stories from her day at school. These moments reminded them why they were fighting to protect this life they had begun to build, the life filled with trust, laughter, and love. One night, Mark was woken by the sound of movement outside. He looked out the window and saw a figure retreating into the shadows. His heart pounded, but he remained calm. He knew that confronting the danger directly could be risky, so he relied on careful observation, calling Leela quietly to keep her and Emma safe inside. They watched from the windows, documenting what they saw, and Mark made a plan to involve local authorities if necessary. Through all this, Mark learned more about Leela's strength and resilience. She had faced threats before, navigated challenges alone, and yet she had found the courage to trust again. Mark realized that her bravery inspired him as much as he protected her. Together, they were stronger than either could be alone. The experience also deepened their bond. They began to communicate with more honesty, not hiding fears or doubts. Leela shared her dreams for the future, her hopes for Emma, and her desire to find peace at last. Mark, in turn, opened up about his fears of losing control, of not being enough as a father, and of wanting to build a life filled with love and safety. These conversations strengthened their connection, turning mutual respect into deep trust and affection. The Cliffside home, once a place of uncertainty and mystery, had become a fortress of hope, love, and resilience. It was no longer just an inherited property. It was a symbol of their courage, their ability to face challenges, and the family they had chosen to create together. They realized that the past might follow them, but it could not define them. They were creating a new story, one of strength, trust, and the power of human connection. As the sun rose over the ocean one morning, casting golden light across the cliffs, Mark, Leela, and Emma stood together on the porch, looking out at the waves. The danger of the past still lingered like a shadow, but it no longer held them captive. They had faced it together, learned from it, and emerged stronger. The Cliffside home was their sanctuary, and they understood that safety, love, and family were built not by walls and locks alone, but by trust, courage, and the willingness to face life together. And in that quiet, powerful moment, Mark realized something profound. The house had brought them together, yes, but it was their shared strength, compassion, and courage that had transformed it into a true home. No matter what the future held, they would face it side by side, ready to protect each other, care for each other, and continue building a life filled with hope, love, and new beginnings. Life in the Cliffside home had changed drastically since Leela had arrived. What once was a quiet, empty house had become a place of warmth, laughter, and life. Mark, Leela, and Emma had grown close, forming bonds that felt stronger than any they had experienced before. Yet, the shadows of the past still lingered. Mark had remained vigilant and Leela was careful, but both knew that the moment of reckoning was approaching. It came on a clear, sunny morning. Mark had gone to check the perimeter of the property, ensuring that everything was secure. He noticed footprints near the cliffside path that hadn't been there the night before. He signaled to Leela, who quickly understood the seriousness of the situation. Emma, curious as ever, was playing nearby, unaware of the danger creeping closer. Mark called her back and made sure she stayed close, explaining gently that they needed to be careful. The figure emerged slowly from the tree line and Mark's heart sank. It was someone from Leela's past, someone determined, someone who had caused her fear before. But Mark didn't panic. He had learned over the weeks that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. He stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Leela and the approaching figure, a protective presence that spoke volumes without words. Leela's eyes widened, but she stood tall, drawing strength from Mark's support. Together, they faced the person who had caused so much fear and uncertainty in her life. Mark's voice was steady as he spoke. "You are not welcome here. Leave and do not return." "We are not afraid to protect ourselves." The figure hesitated, clearly surprised by their unity and determination. Leela stepped closer to Mark, holding Emma's hand tightly. "I am not the same person you tried to control," she said firmly. "I am safe now and I will not be threatened. Leave and never come back." There was a tense silence, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. For a moment, it seemed as though the past might still win, that the fear and danger could overwhelm them. But then, slowly, the figure turned and retreated into the trees, leaving them unharmed. Relief washed over Mark, Layla, and Emma. The danger had passed, for now, and they knew that together they could face anything. After the confrontation, Mark and Leela spent time talking through the experience. They realized that fear would always be a part of life, but courage, trust, and love were stronger. Mark had seen Leela's bravery firsthand, and he knew that she had survived countless challenges because of her inner strength. Leela, in turn, had seen Mark's unwavering commitment to protect and care for her and Emma. Their bond had deepened, rooted not just in shared experiences, but in the trust that comes from facing adversity together. Emma, oblivious to most of the danger but sensing the seriousness of the moment, clung to both Mark and Leela. Her presence reminded them why they were fighting, not just for themselves, but for the little girl whose life had already been shaped by love, care, and resilience. They were building a family, not just surviving a story of fear, but creating one of hope, security, and connection. In the days that followed, Mark and Leela worked to make the house even safer and more welcoming. They installed stronger locks, added lights around the property, and ensured that Emma knew basic safety rules without feeling frightened. They also spent time improving the garden, planting flowers and vegetables that thrived in the sunny cliffside climate. Each small task, each shared moment, reminded them of the life they were building together, a life filled with trust, effort, and care. Evenings became a special time for them. They would sit together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the ocean and cliffs in colors that seemed almost magical. Mark often reflected on how far they had come. The house that had once been an inheritance of uncertainty had become a home of love and security. Leela had gone from a frightened stranger to a vital part of their lives, and Emma had found a role model and friend in her. One evening, as the three of them sat by the fireplace, Mark realized how much the experience had changed him. He had learned that life's unexpected challenges could bring people together in ways that were beautiful and transformative. He had learned that trust and vulnerability were not weaknesses but sources of strength. And he had learned that love could take many forms, not just romantic but familial, protective, and nurturing. Leela, too, had grown. She had faced her fears, confronted the past, and found a place where she could feel safe and valued. She had discovered that home was not just a physical place, but a space of connection and support. She had found people she could rely on, and in doing so she had created a life filled with hope and purpose. Emma, ever curious and joyful, thrived in this new environment. She learned about resilience, kindness, and the power of community. She saw how adults could face challenges without losing their compassion, how courage and empathy could coexist. And most importantly, she felt secure in a home where love was abundant, consistent, and unwavering. As weeks turned into months, the Cliffside home transformed even further. Leela began to organize small projects to improve the property, fixing broken windows, painting walls, and even restoring old furniture that had been neglected for years. Mark joined in, appreciating her initiative and feeling a deep sense of partnership. Together, they turned the once-abandoned house into a warm, vibrant home, a place where memories could be made and joy could flourish. One morning, Mark awoke early and walked to the cliff's edge. The sunrise over the ocean was breathtaking, casting shimmering gold across the water. Leela joined him silently, and they stood together, holding hands. "We did it," Mark whispered. "We made this place ours, not just by living here, but by creating life, love, and safety within it." Leela smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "And we'll continue to build it together," she said. Emma ran toward them, laughing, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from the garden. She handed them to Leela, who knelt to her level and hugged her tightly. "These are perfect," Leela said. "Just like you," Mark watched, feeling his heart swell with gratitude and love. They had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, and emerged stronger, united, and ready for the future. Over time, neighbors began to notice the change in the house. The once overgrown garden now flourished. The windows gleamed in the sunlight, and laughter could often be heard echoing through the hallways. The Cliffside home had become a symbol of resilience, love, and renewal, not just for Mark, Leela, and Emma, but for anyone who saw the transformation. One afternoon, Mark reflected on everything that had brought them to this point. The inheritance that had seemed like a simple windfall had turned into something far greater, a chance to rebuild lives, to discover love, and to create a family united not by blood, but by trust, courage, and compassion. Leela's arrival had changed everything, and in turn, their shared journey had transformed her life as well. As evening fell, the three of them gathered on the porch once again, watching the sun set behind the cliffs. The sky glowed in shades of pink, orange, and purple, and the ocean reflected the colors like a mirror. Emma leaned against Mark, her small hand in his, while Leela rested her head on his shoulder. In that moment, Mark understood the true meaning of family. It wasn't about where you came from or the mistakes of the past. It was about choosing to care, protect, and love one another every day, no matter the challenges that life might bring. The Cliffside home, inherited unexpectedly, had become more than a house. It was a sanctuary, a place of growth, and a symbol of hope. Mark had discovered that life's most profound changes often came from the most unexpected sources. Leela had taught him courage and resilience. Emma had taught him joy and innocence. And together, they had created a life filled with love, trust, and possibility. Mark knew that challenges might come again, that life would continue to test their strength and unity. But he also knew that together, they were unstoppable. They had faced the past, confronted danger, and emerged stronger and closer than ever. The home on the cliff was no longer just walls and furniture. It was a living testament to their courage, love, and commitment to each other. As night fell and the moon rose over the ocean, casting silver light across the cliffs, Mark, Leela, and Emma sat together, peaceful and content. The sound of the waves below was constant, steady, and calming. They had faced the trials of the past, embraced the present, and were ready for the future. And in that moment, Mark realized something simple yet profound. Life's greatest gifts often arrive unexpectedly, in the form of people, love, and experiences that change everything. The Cliffside home had brought them together, but it was their love, trust, and courage that had made it a true home. They had turned inheritance into destiny, loneliness into family, and fear into hope. And as the stars appeared one by one in the clear night sky, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, as a family bound not by blood alone, but by heart.